November 30th, 1942. 23:14 hours. Bridge of the destroyer, USS Fletcher. Ironbottom Sound. Commander William Cole stared at the green glow of the PPI scope in the chart house as bright phosphorescent contacts materialized on the circular display. Range 7,000 yards. 8 Japanese destroyers. Moving south along the coast of Guadalcanal, completely unaware they were being watched. For 2 decades, the Imperial Japanese Navy had perfected night combat into a lethal science. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Their lookouts could spot ship silhouettes at distances that seemed almost supernatural. Their optics gathered starlight through enormous glass lenses. Their flashless powder kept them invisible in the darkness, while their long lance torpedoes reached targets beyond any range the Americans could match. But tonight, something fundamental had shifted. Cole's radar operators were tracking the enemy force with mechanical precision, while Japanese lookouts strained uselessly into the darkness. The Americans could see without being seen. They could target without revealing their position. They possessed 4 minutes of perfect tactical advantage, 4 minutes where they held complete knowledge of the enemy's location, course, and speed, while the Japanese steamed forward in blissful ignorance. Cole keyed his radio to Admiral Wright aboard the cruiser Minneapolis, permission to launch torpedoes. The range was optimal. The angle was perfect. This was the moment radar technology had promised. But the seconds ticked past. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. The Admiral wanted visual confirmation. The technological advantage that should have guaranteed victory was slipping away with each passing moment. What Commander Cole couldn't fully comprehend yet was that he was witnessing the intersection of 2 naval philosophies, one rooted in 2,000 years of visual warfare, the other barely 18 months old. The Battle of Tassafaronga would become a tactical defeat for the Americans, but it represented something far more significant. It was the moment when electronic warfare began its inexorable replacement of human skill, when the mathematics of detection range started mattering more than the courage of lookouts, when the future of naval combat was written not in doctrine but in oscilloscopes and magnetrons. The Japanese advantage in night fighting hadn't emerged by accident. It was the product of deliberate cultivation stretching back to the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905. At the Battle of Tsushima, Admiral Togo's torpedo boats had devastated the Russian Baltic Fleet under cover of darkness. That victory became naval gospel for Japan, establishing night combat as the cornerstone of strategy for defeating numerically superior enemies. By 1942, this doctrine had evolved into the most sophisticated night fighting system in the world. Japanese sailors trained relentlessly in darkness. Lookouts underwent specialized programs beginning the moment they entered service. They spent hours in deliberately darkened compartments, allowing their eyes to adapt to minimal light conditions. Medical officers monitored their diets to prevent vitamin A deficiencies that could cause night blindness. They practiced distance estimation in progressively lower light conditions until they could accurately gauge ranges on moonless nights. The results of this training were remarkable. The average Japanese lookout could spot ship silhouettes at 7,000 meters on a moonless night. American lookouts, by comparison, struggled to identify contacts beyond 3,000 meters under identical conditions. This wasn't marginal superiority. It was overwhelming tactical advantage that translated directly into combat effectiveness. Japanese Optical technology supported and enhanced this human skill. Their binoculars represented the pinnacle of 1930s optical engineering. Manufactured primarily by Nippon Kogaku, later known as Nikon, these instruments featured apertures ranging from 5 centimeters for handheld models to an enormous 21 centimeters for pedestal-mounted systems. The largest binoculars used lenses with light-gathering capabilities that surpassed anything in Western navies. The most sophisticated models included specialized filters designed specifically for night operations. These filters captured and refracted available starlight and moonlight, effectively amplifying the minimal illumination available on dark nights. Combined with superior glass quality and precise lens craftsmanship, Japanese naval binoculars could gather nearly twice the light of comparable American equipment. The development of Japanese optical technology had followed a deliberate path of industrial evolution. During World War I, Japan had relied heavily on imported German optics, particularly from Barr and Stroud in Great Britain. The difficulty obtaining these supplies during wartime prompted the Japanese government to mandate domestic optical production. Nippon Kogaku, the Japan Optical Company founded in 1918, began producing lenses using knowledge acquired from foreign partnerships but refined through indigenous engineering. By 1930, Japan had achieved complete independence in optical manufacturing. Their binocular production encompassed models ranging from 5-centimeter handheld units for general use to the massive 21-centimeter pedestal-mounted systems installed on major warships. The 12-centimeter binoculars became standard for directors and lookouts across the destroyer fleet. These weren't merely enlarged versions of smaller binoculars. They were precision instruments designed specifically for maritime conditions, with sealed housings to prevent moisture, infiltration, and shock-resistant mountings to handle the violent motion of ships in heavy seas. The optical glass itself represented a significant technical achievement. Japanese manufacturers had mastered the art of producing glass with minimal internal distortion and maximum light transmission. The lenses were ground to tolerances measured in microns, then assembled in configurations that minimized chromatic aberration while maximizing light-gathering capability. Each binocular underwent rigorous testing before installation aboard warships, with acceptance standards that rejected any unit showing the slightest optical imperfection. But the optical superiority extended beyond binoculars. Japanese rangefinders used stereoscopic systems with exceptional precision. The largest rangefinders installed on battleships and cruisers measured over 8 meters in length, providing unprecedented accuracy at extended ranges. These instruments could measure distance to targets at 15,000 meters, with accuracy sufficient to lay guns within 50 meters of the true range. This precision made the difference between hits and misses in the opening salvos of an engagement. Japanese searchlights represented another area of technical excellence. The largest models could produce beams visible at ranges exceeding 20,000 meters, but the Japanese understood that searchlights were double-edged weapons. Illuminating an enemy also revealed your own position. Their tactical doctrine emphasized selective searchlight use, with designated illumination ships activating their lights to allow other vessels to engage without revealing themselves. This coordination required extensive training, but produced devastating results when executed properly. They developed star shells with longer burn times and brighter illumination than American equivalents. Japanese star shells could remain aloft for up to 40 seconds, providing sustained illumination across wide areas of ocean. The shells were designed to ignite at optimal altitudes, creating a brilliant light source that threw target ships into sharp silhouette while the launching vessel remained in relative darkness. Forward observers learned to read the patterns of star shell illumination, determining target distance, course, and speed from the shadows and highlights visible during each period of illumination. Every aspect of their night fighting equipment was optimized for visual warfare in darkness. Damage control parties carried red-filtered flashlights that provided just enough illumination to work without destroying night vision. Bridge windows were treated with coatings that reduced glare from instrument panels. Even the paint schemes on Japanese warships were chosen partially for their properties under low-light conditions, with colors that blended into darkness better than the standard gray used by Western navies. The Japanese Navy also understood the psychological dimension of night combat. Sailors who excelled at night operations were given special recognition and advancement opportunities. Destroyer crews took enormous pride in their night-fighting capabilities. This pride translated into motivation during training and confidence during combat. Japanese destroyermen believed themselves invincible in darkness, a belief reinforced by their early war victories. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this, and one that made the eventual revelation of American radar superiority even more psychologically devastating. The tactical doctrine built on this technical foundation was equally sophisticated. Japanese commanders understood that night combat favored the side that saw first and struck first. They trained to fight in rigid columns that maximized the effectiveness of their optics. Lookouts were positioned to provide overlapping coverage across the entire horizon. Communication protocols ensured that visual contacts reached decision-makers within seconds. Most critically, the Japanese had perfected the art of preserving night vision during combat. They used flashless powder that reduced muzzle flash by more than 70% compared to standard American powder. When they did fire, they used salvo fire rather than continuous fire. A warning buzzer sounded seconds before each salvo, allowing lookouts to close their eyes and preserve their scotopic vision. Between salvos, observers had several seconds to scan for targets and assess the effectiveness of their fire. Interior lighting on Japanese warships used red illumination that didn't destroy the light-sensitive pigment in rod cells. American ships, by contrast, used blue lighting that seemed aesthetically appropriate for naval operations, but destroyed night vision just as effectively as white light. Japanese damage control parties could move through darkened compartments without compromising the vision of personnel on watch. The Type 93 long-lance torpedo complemented this night fighting system perfectly. With a range of 40,000 meters and a speed of 49 knots, it could strike targets far beyond the visual detection range of any navy. Japanese destroyers carried these weapons in large numbers, with quintuple torpedo mounts on each side of the ship. In night combat, a single Japanese destroyer division could launch 40 long-lance torpedoes in a coordinated spread, creating a wall of destruction that no amount of tactical maneuvering could avoid. The early Pacific War validated every assumption of Japanese night fighting doctrine. At the Battle of Savo Island on August 9, 1942, Japanese cruisers annihilated an Allied screening force in 32 minutes of night combat. The heavy cruisers Astoria, Quincy, and Vincennes went to the bottom along with the Australian cruiser Canberra. The Japanese force suffered minimal damage and withdrew before American reinforcements could arrive. The statistics from Savo Island revealed the lopsided nature of visual night combat. Japanese lookouts spotted the American cruiser Vincennes at 18,000 yards. The American ships, despite being equipped with early model CXAM radar, didn't detect the Japanese force until visual contact at approximately 12,000 yards. By the time American commanders understood what was happening, Japanese long-lance torpedoes were already in the water. At the Battle of Tassafaronga on November 30, 1942, a single Japanese destroyer squadron would savage a superior American cruiser force. Admiral Wright Tanaka's 8 destroyers, loaded with supply drums for the starving garrison on Guadalcanal, encountered Rear Admiral Carleton Wright's task force of 5 cruisers and 4 destroyers. The Americans possessed radar. They detected the Japanese at 23,000 yards. They had numerical superiority and heavier guns. But Tanaka's force demonstrated the lethal effectiveness of Japanese night fighting even when caught at a tactical disadvantage. After absorbing the initial American attack that sank the destroyer Takanami, the remaining Japanese destroyers launched a coordinated long-lance attack that crippled 4 American heavy cruisers. Minneapolis, New Orleans, and Pensacola suffered catastrophic torpedo damage. Northampton sank. The Americans inflicted minimal additional damage on the Japanese force. The Battle of Tassafaronga became a case study in what happened when technological advantage wasn't properly exploited. Commander Cole's request to launch torpedoes at 23:14 hours had been delayed for 4 critical minutes, while Admiral Wright sought visual confirmation of the radar contacts. By the time permission was granted, the optimal firing angle had passed. The American torpedoes missed entirely. The American cruisers then opened fire, their gun flashes illuminating themselves against the darkness. Japanese lookouts immediately spotted the muzzle flashes and calculated accurate firing solutions. The long-lance torpedoes that followed were launched by destroyers that American gunners couldn't see. The weapons traveled through pitch darkness, guided only by carefully calculated bearings. They struck with devastating precision. Unknown to the Japanese, a revolution in radar technology was already rendering their night fighting superiority obsolete. The SG surface search radar, developed under guidance from the MIT Radiation Laboratory and the Naval Research Laboratory, represented a quantum leap beyond the primitive sets that had failed so spectacularly at earlier battles. The MIT Radiation Laboratory had been established in November 1940 with a specific mission: develop microwave radar systems that could give the Allies decisive tactical advantage. The laboratory was created in direct response to the British revelation that they had developed a revolutionary microwave generator called the cavity magnetron. When the British Tizard mission arrived in America in September 1940, they brought with them a device that would change the course of the war. The cavity magnetron they delivered produced 50 kilowatts of power at 10 centimeter wavelength. This was 100 times more powerful than existing American transmitter technology. Historian James Finney Baxter III would later call it the most valuable cargo ever brought to our shores. The device was small enough to hold in your hand but represented years of British research into microwave generation. The Americans recognized immediately that this technology could revolutionize radar. Dr. Lee Dubridge was appointed director of the MIT Radiation Laboratory. He assembled a team that would grow to nearly 4,000 employees by 1943. These weren't merely technicians and engineers. The laboratory recruited some of the finest scientific minds in America. 9 staff members would later win Nobel Prizes, though their wartime contributions to radar development would remain classified for decades. The laboratory operated with extraordinary freedom and funding. Military officers worked alongside civilian scientists in an environment that encouraged rapid innovation. When operators reported problems with existing radar systems, engineers could redesign and test improved versions within weeks. This feedback loop between combat experience and technical development produced the fastest rate of radar improvement in history. The SG radar emerged from this environment in 1941. The prototype was tested aboard the destroyer USS Semmes in May of that year. The results were immediately promising, but revealed areas needing improvement. The production model that emerged incorporated lessons from these sea trials and from continuing British experience with microwave radar in combat conditions. Operating at 3 GHz, the SG radar used a frequency that provided exceptional resolution and accuracy compared to earlier meter-wave systems. The shorter wavelength meant smaller antennas that were easier to mount and rotate, but more importantly, it meant finer discrimination between targets. Where older radar might show 2 ships as a single blip, the SG could distinguish individual vessels, even when they steamed in close formation. With 50 kilowatts of peak power, it could detect a destroyer at 15 nautical miles and maintain track accuracy to within 40 yards in range and half a degree in bearing. These weren't theoretical specifications. These were the performance characteristics achieved consistently in operational conditions. The system maintained this accuracy in heavy seas, during maneuvers, and while the ship was firing its guns. Weather that rendered visual observation impossible had minimal effect on radar performance. The system weighed only 1,000 pounds, light enough to mount on destroyers without compromising stability. Earlier radar sets had weighed several tons and required extensive structural modifications to install. The SG's compact design meant it could be retrofitted to existing destroyers relatively quickly. The installation process took experienced shipyard workers approximately 1 week per ship, allowing rapid fleet-wide deployment. Operational availability above 95% meant the radar was functional when needed. This reliability represented a quantum leap from earlier systems that might fail during the critical moments of battle. The SG radar was practical, reliable, and effective in ways that earlier radar systems had never achieved. It worked when commanders needed it most, in the darkness and chaos of night combat, where seconds of downtime could mean the difference between victory and death. The truly revolutionary feature was the plan position indicator scope. Unlike previous radar displays that showed only range and bearing as separate data points, the PPI presented a god's-eye view of the entire battle space on a circular screen. Operators could see multiple contacts simultaneously, track their movements, distinguish between different ship types by their radar returns, and even detect torpedo wakes and periscopes. The PPI updated every 2 seconds, providing real-time tactical information that no amount of visual observation could match. The system worked equally well in daylight or darkness, clear weather or storms, smoke or fog. Weather conditions that reduced visibility to zero had no effect on radar detection. The electronic eye never tired, never lost its night vision from gun flashes, never needed time to dark adapt. Integration with the Mark 37 gun director created a fire control system of unprecedented capability. The director linked to an analog computer that automatically calculated firing solutions, adjusting for target speed, course, wind, and ship motion. The 5-inch 38 caliber guns, standard on Fletcher-class destroyers, could fire 15 to 20 rounds per minute with radar-directed accuracy at ranges beyond 10,000 yards. The first, Fletcher-class destroyer, USS Fletcher herself, was commissioned on June 30, 1942, carrying the SG radar as standard equipment. By November, Fletcher was operating in the Solomon Islands. She would be present at the naval Battle of Guadalcanal and would lead the American force at Tassafaronga, making the first radar contact with the Japanese. The night of November 12 to 13, 1942, began the systematic destruction of Japanese assumptions about night combat superiority. The naval Battle of Guadalcanal involved multiple phases of surface action over 3 days. During the night action on November 13, USS Helena's SG radar detected Japanese ships at 27,000 yards, far beyond any visual range. For 20 minutes, American radar operators tracked the approaching Japanese force, while Japanese lookouts strained futilely into the darkness. When the battle began, American radar-directed fire disrupted Japanese formations before they could employ their superior night fighting tactics. The destroyer Akatsuki, attempting her specialized night torpedo attack, was caught in radar-directed crossfire from multiple American ships. She exploded and sank within minutes. Commander Tamechi Hara on the destroyer Amatsukaze experienced this new reality firsthand. His ship successfully torpedoed USS Barton, breaking her in half, and crippled USS Juno. But when Hara illuminated USS San Francisco with searchlights to improve his gunnery, USS Helena's radar-directed guns immediately found Amatsukaze in the darkness. The concentrated fire caused severe damage and killed 43 crew members. The battleship Hiei became the focus of American radar-directed fire that night. In darkness and rain squalls that should have provided perfect concealment, she absorbed 85 shell hits from enemies firing at ranges beyond Japanese visual capability. Her bridge was wrecked, her steering destroyed, her superstructure set ablaze. She would be scuttled the next day, becoming the first Japanese battleship lost in the war. The technological disparity between American and Japanese radar capabilities was staggering. The American SG radar detected destroyers at 15 nautical miles, with accuracy of plus or minus 40 yards in range and plus or minus half a degree in bearing. The Japanese Type 22 radar detected destroyers at 10 nautical miles under optimal conditions with accuracy of plus or minus 300 yards in range and plus or minus 5 degrees in bearing. Operational reliability told an even more devastating story. American SG radar maintained 95% availability. Of the first 60 Japanese Type 22 sets built, only about 6 actually worked reliably. Total Japanese radar production during the entire war reached approximately 300 units. The Americans produced 1,000 SG radar sets alone, not counting the thousands of other radar systems developed for different applications. The organizational problems underlying Japan's radar deficiency were more fundamental than mere technical limitations. The Imperial Japanese Navy had fragmented its radar development across multiple competing programs. The Navy Technical Department, the Naval Aeronautical Department, and various university research groups all pursued separate radar projects with minimal coordination. Bureaucratic rivalry prevented the consolidation of resources and expertise that characterized American and British radar development. Japanese radar engineers understood the theoretical principles perfectly. Some had studied abroad before the war and maintained awareness of Western progress in electronics. But they operated without the industrial infrastructure, the supply of critical materials, or the institutional support necessary to translate theory into practical systems. Copper shortages limited transmitter power. Vacuum tube production couldn't meet demand. Precision, manufacturing tolerances required for microwave components exceeded Japanese industrial capabilities. Perhaps most critically, operational commanders in the Imperial Japanese Navy didn't believe radar mattered. Their decades of investment in night-fighting training and optical equipment had produced undeniable results. Why trust electronic systems when human skill had proven so effective? This attitude pervaded Japanese naval culture from the highest levels. Fleet commanders continued planning visual-range night attacks, even as American radar systematically destroyed their forces in the darkness. The few Japanese technical officers who understood radar's implications were ignored by operational commanders wedded to traditional doctrine. These engineers became prophets without honor, predicting defeat while being dismissed by leadership that refused to acknowledge technological reality. The disconnect between technical understanding and operational doctrine would prove fatal. By late 1942, the pattern was established. American destroyers, equipped with SG radar, could detect Japanese forces at extreme range, track them through weather and darkness, and direct accurate fire without ever being seen. Japanese lookouts, no matter how skilled or well-equipped, couldn't compete with electronics that saw farther, more accurately, and without the limitations of human physiology. The night of November 30th at Tassafaronga demonstrated both the potential and the limitations of this technological revolution. Commander Coles Fletcher had detected the Japanese at optimal torpedo range. The radar data was perfect. The tactical situation favored the Americans completely. But Admiral Wright's hesitation to trust the radar delayed action until the moment passed. The technology was ready. The tactical doctrine wasn't. The 4 minutes between radar contact and permission to fire represented the transition period when American commanders still thought like visual, warfare practitioners. Wright wanted to see the enemy before committing to action. He trusted his eyes more than his electronics. That instinct, perfectly rational for a naval officer trained in traditional warfare, cost him 4 cruisers. In December 1942, Fletcher's officers took to their motor whaleboats and spread throughout the destroyer force at Espiritu Santo. They demonstrated their techniques for using radar in battle, showing other captains how the PPI scope could transform night combat from chaos into calculated precision. The lessons from Tassafaronga were being absorbed not as evidence of radar's failure, but as proof that commanders needed to trust the technology completely. The following June, Fletcher's executive officer, Lieutenant Commander Joseph Wiley Jr., was ordered to Pearl Harbor, where he led development of the first Combat Information Center handbook for destroyers. The CIC represented a fundamental reimagining of how warships processed tactical information. Instead of having the captain on the open bridge relying primarily on visual observation, the CIC created a dedicated space where trained operators synthesized radar data, visual reports, and communications into a comprehensive picture of the battle space. Commander Arleigh Burke arrived in the South Pacific in February 1943 and studied Cole's action at Tassafaronga intensively. His conclusion was revolutionary for American destroyer doctrine. Destroyers could be most effective if trusted to attack independently based on their radar information rather than waiting for visual confirmation from cruiser admirals. Burke would implement these lessons with devastating effect in later battles, creating the fast attack destroyer tactics that would dominate the remainder of the war. The transformation of American radar doctrine accelerated through 1943. Ships with SG radar learned to exploit their advantage systematically. They practiced radar-directed torpedo attacks in training exercises. They developed communications protocols that allowed radar operators to guide gunnery solutions in real time. They learned to maneuver in total darkness, using only radar returns from nearby friendly ships for station keeping. The Battle of Vella Gulf on August 6th and 7th, 1943, demonstrated the complete reversal of night fighting superiority. Commander Frederick Moosbrugger led 6 American destroyers, equipped with SG radar, against 4 Japanese destroyers on a Tokyo Express run. The Americans detected the Japanese at 16,000 yards and maneuvered into optimal torpedo firing position while remaining completely undetected. At 0 to 1:43 hours, the American destroyers launched a coordinated spread of 24 torpedoes based purely on radar data. The Japanese had no warning, no visual sighting, no detection by their limited radar systems. The torpedoes arrived without any indication they were coming. 3 Japanese destroyers were hit and sank within minutes. The 4th escaped damaged. Not a single American ship was hit. The Americans didn't even use their guns during the initial attack. Vela Gulf represented the tactical ideal that Tassafaronga had promised but failed to deliver. American destroyers using radar to detect, track, and attack enemy forces that never knew they were under observation. The mathematics of electronic warfare were brutal in their simplicity. The side that saw first and struck first won decisively. Japanese optical superiority and lookout training meant nothing against enemies they couldn't see. The Battle of Empress Augusta Bay on November 2, 1943, reinforced these lessons on a larger scale. Rear Admiral Aaron Merrill's task force of 4 light cruisers and 8 destroyers engaged a Japanese force of 2 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 6 destroyers. American radar detected the Japanese at 35,000 yards. The Americans maneuvered into firing position and launched their attack before Japanese lookouts spotted them. The resulting battle saw American radar-directed fire systematically destroy Japanese ships that struggled to locate their attackers. The light cruiser Sendai was sunk. The heavy cruiser Myoko was damaged. The destroyer Hatsukaze was sunk. American losses were minimal, with only light damage to several ships. The Japanese force withdrew in confusion, unable to understand how the Americans were achieving such accurate fire in near-total darkness. Commander Tamechi Hara, who survived the war aboard multiple destroyers, later described the psychological impact of fighting enemies you couldn't see. Japanese sailors knew American radar existed by late 1942. They understood intellectually that they were being tracked and targeted electronically. But the human mind rebels against the idea of being watched by invisible eyes. Lookouts continued scanning desperately, even when they knew radar made their efforts futile. It was the only way they knew how to fight. By mid-1943, Japanese night-fighting doctrine had entered a death spiral. Their tactics assumed they would see the enemy first. Their training emphasized visual detection and rapid response to sightings. Their weapons, especially the long-lance torpedo, required visual targeting data for optimal employment. When American radar removed the possibility of seeing first, the entire tactical system collapsed. Japanese commanders attempted various countermeasures. They tried to detect American radar emissions using primitive receivers. They attempted to jam radar with noise transmitters. They experimented with formations designed to confuse radar returns. Nothing worked effectively. American radar technology was too sophisticated, too reliable, and too thoroughly integrated into American tactical doctrine. The few Japanese ships that received radar installations by late 1943 discovered their systems were nearly useless. Type 22 radar had such poor accuracy that commanders couldn't use it to direct gunfire. The sets were so unreliable that they often failed during combat. Even when functioning, they detected targets at ranges shorter than trained lookouts could spot them visually under good conditions. The technology existed, but it was generations behind American capabilities. The disparity in radar production revealed the industrial dimension of the technology gap. MIT Radiation Laboratory alone developed over 100 different microwave radar systems during the war, with total production value exceeding $1.5 billion. The British and Americans combined produced hundreds of thousands of radar sets across dozens of different models. The Japanese produced hundreds. This wasn't merely a matter of resources or manufacturing capacity. It represented a fundamental difference in how the two sides approached technological warfare. American and British radar development was centralized, heavily funded, and given highest priority. Scientists worked directly with military operators to refine systems based on combat experience. Feedback loops between fleet commanders and laboratory engineers allowed rapid improvement of radar performance. Japanese radar development remained fragmented, underfunded, and disconnected from operational requirements. Fleet commanders didn't communicate their needs to engineers effectively. Engineers didn't understand the tactical environment in which their systems would operate. The few radar sets that reached operational status were deployed without adequate training for operators or integration into tactical doctrine. The radar revolution forced fundamental changes in naval doctrine that persist to modern times. Night combat shifted from human skill to electronic capability. Fleet formations changed to maximize radar coverage rather than visual observation. Communication protocols evolved to prioritize radar data over visual reports. Command and control migrated from open bridges to enclosed CIC spaces, where operators could focus on electronic displays without distraction. Every modern navy acknowledges that electronic detection superseded visual observation as the primary means of naval combat. The United States Naval War College study of 1947 concluded that future naval combat would be determined by electronic capabilities rather than seamanship in the traditional sense. Superior sensors mattered more than superior tactics. Seeing first trumped moving first or shooting first. The Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force, established in the 1950s, built its founding principles on lessons learned from the radar war. Electronic warfare capability became the foundation of naval power. Sensor superiority took precedence over all other considerations. The descendants of the Imperial Japanese Navy learned the lesson their predecessors had refused to accept until defeat made it undeniable. The human cost of Japan's technological blindness was staggering. Destroyer losses to surface combat accelerated through 1943 and 44 as American radar dominance became absolute. In 1943 alone, the Imperial Japanese Navy lost 31 destroyers, primarily to surface combat. In 1944, 28 more destroyers were lost. These weren't just ships. They were the trained crews, the experienced commanders, the institutional knowledge that couldn't be replaced. Commander Hara published his memoir, Japanese Destroyer Captain, in 1961. His assessment of the radar war stands as the most comprehensive first-hand account from the Japanese perspective. Hara participated in 16 major naval battles and witnessed the complete transformation of naval warfare from visual combat to electronic dominance. He survived aboard Amatsukaze, Yahagi, and finally the destroyer Shigure, outlasting almost every other destroyer captain from Pearl Harbor. In his memoir, Hara criticized Japanese leadership for failing to appreciate the speed with which enemies could develop new weapons and never understanding the implications of technological change. The Imperial Japanese Navy had assumed that tactical skill and warrior spirit could overcome material disadvantages. The radar war proved that assumption catastrophically wrong. Technology wasn't supplementary in modern war, it was supreme. Admiral Raizo Tanaka published his own assessment in 1956 in the U.S. Naval Institute Proceedings article titled Japan's Losing Struggle for Guadalcanal. He acknowledged that American radar had fundamentally changed naval warfare, making traditional Japanese night fighting tactics obsolete. The master of night combat operations admitted that electronic eyes had defeated human ones decisively and permanently. The statistics quantify the technological revolution. American destroyer losses in night surface combat dropped dramatically once SG radar became standard equipment. In November and December 1942, the Americans lost 3 destroyers in night actions. In 1943, they lost 4. In 1944, they lost 1. In 1945, through war's end, they lost 0 destroyers to night surface combat. Japanese destroyer losses followed the opposite trajectory. In November and December 1942, they lost 4 destroyers to night surface combat. In 1943, 31 destroyers were sunk. In 1944, 28 destroyers were lost. In 1945 through August, 14 more destroyers went down. The curve of losses matched the curve of American radar deployment almost perfectly. By 1944, the technology gap had become absolute. 175 American destroyers carried effective radar. 0 Japanese destroyers had radar systems that provided meaningful tactical advantage. American radar range advantage exceeded 200 to 300% under most conditions. Japanese night vision advantage, the product of decades of training and investment, had been negated completely. The Fletcher-class destroyers with their SG radar sets achieved something unprecedented in military history: the complete negation of an enemy's primary tactical advantage through technological superiority. Japanese night-fighting expertise, carefully cultivated since 1904, was rendered worthless by magnetrons and oscilloscopes mass-produced in American factories. The broader lesson transcends the specific technology. In modern warfare, industrial capacity matters as much as tactical skill. The ability to develop, produce, and deploy superior systems at scale determines outcomes as surely as courage or training. Japan's finest lookouts couldn't overcome the fact that America could build 1,000 radar sets while Japan built 300 inferior ones. Commander Cole's experience at Tassafaronga encapsulates this transition. He possessed perfect tactical information. His radar gave him godlike knowledge of enemy positions. But doctrine, training, and command culture weren't ready to trust the technology completely. The 4-minute delay represented not technological failure, but doctrinal lag. The tools were ready before the tactics caught up. By 1943, American commanders had learned to trust their radar absolutely. They attacked on electronic data alone. They maneuvered in total darkness using only radar returns. They accepted that the green glow of the PPI scope showed reality more accurately than their own eyes. That acceptance, that willingness to trust technology over instinct, made American radar advantage decisive rather than merely potential. The Imperial Japanese Navy that entered the war as masters of night combat ended it unable to venture out after darkness. Their destroyers, once the terror of Pacific waters, became hunted prey. Their lookouts, trained to superhuman standards, were blinded by technology they couldn't see and couldn't counter. The darkness that had been their greatest ally became their tomb. Fletcher herself continued serving throughout the war, accumulating 15 battle stars for World War II service. She participated in the Gilbert Islands campaign, the Marshall Islands campaign, the New Guinea operations, and the Philippine liberation. She screened carriers, bombarded beaches, rescued downed aviators, and engaged enemy forces from the Solomons to Okinawa. She survived the entire war and continued serving into the Korean War, earning 5 more battle stars. The ship was decommissioned in January 1947, but recommissioned in October 1949 as an anti-submarine warfare specialist. She served another 2 decades, finally being decommissioned for the last time on October 1, 1969. She was sold for scrap in February 1972, ending a career that spanned 27 years and 2 wars. But Fletcher's most significant contribution wasn't her combat record. It was her role in demonstrating that radar could revolutionize naval warfare. That first radar contact at Tassafaronga, transmitted by Commander Cole at 23:14 hours on November 30, 1942, represented the moment when electronic warfare became more important than visual warfare in naval combat. The revolution was complete, irreversible, and devastating for those who failed to adapt. The age of visual naval combat ended in the waters around Guadalcanal, replaced forever by electronic warfare that cared nothing for courage, tradition, or warrior spirit. The Japanese had been masters of night combat, perfecting their skills across decades of training and investment. But in just 18 months, American radar turned their mastery into obsolescence, their expertise into irrelevance, and their night-fighting advantage into a fatal liability. The mathematics were brutal in their simplicity. Detection range multiplied by reaction time equaled tactical advantage. American radar detected at 15 miles. Japanese visual observation detected at 4 miles maximum. That 11-mile difference meant the Americans had 8 to 10 minutes to detect, track, and engage before Japanese lookouts even knew enemies were present. In night combat, those minutes meant everything. Japanese doctrine had assumed they would always see first because they had always seen first. Their training emphasized immediate response to visual contact. Their tactics required closing to optimal torpedo range based on visual bearings. Their weapons were optimized for the ranges at which human eyes could guide them. The entire system was built on a foundation of visual superiority that radar demolished completely. By war's end, the lessons were undeniable. Those who could see electronically won. Those who remained dependent on visual observation lost. The technological revolution had rewritten the rules of naval warfare completely. The Imperial Japanese Navy learned this lesson the hardest way possible, through the destruction of their destroyer force and the death of thousands of highly trained sailors. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.